Please welcome Christopher Lipson. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I trust that you enjoyed your dinner and had a good chance to meet with some friends, but also hopefully met some new people along the way. Maybe while you were in the queue, you got to know some new folk. But now we're at the highlight of the evening, and that is the lecture to be given by Ashley Bloomfield. And I guess picking up our theme around good governance, it really is, it's very, very important when you think about crisis that a country, an organisation or a company may face. And leaders in particular are counted upon to step up to their responsibilities at very difficult times. And all that accumulated wisdom and judgment are crucial to making sound decisions under the pressure of time and also media attention. Ashley's been in that position since the 28th of February last year, when we confirmed the first case of COVID here in New Zealand shores. And he has on shore a very unique perspective on good governance and leadership while dealing with the challenges of the pandemic. So can you please join me and give a very warm welcome to Dr. Ashley Bloomfield.
Kia ora koutou katoa. This is not a COVID-19 announcement. However, it was. I would be announcing that there were no cases of COVID-19 in the community, which is a great place to be. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here tonight, to those who have organised the evening, for your patience in finding a date that worked. It's a real pleasure to be here at this large event where we can all gather because we can. And that is by no means a situation in most countries around the world where we can do this safely. And it is a real pleasure to be here. Thank you to Chris for the introduction, and I want to especially greet all those distinguished guests who are here tonight, including members of Parliament from both sides of the House. I should, of course most of you know this, but I'm not a politician. I'm a very proud and committed public servant in the New Zealand public service, and I'll come back to that a bit later. And of course the last 20 months have been a bit of a ride in my role as a public servant, but I have been doing the best I could to continue to serve the public. I want to also acknowledge at the outset my family, my wife Dr. Bloomfield, who couldn't join me here tonight. She's been, we've been married 31 years, we just celebrated that a couple of weeks ago. In addition to putting up with me for 31 years, she's also been hugely supportive and essential to my physical and mental well-being over this last 20 months. So I just want to acknowledge her. I call her the clever doctor in the house. She's much smarter than I am. And she also essentially put aside her medical career to help raise a family with three amazing young people who are children. Olivia, who's 24, Matthew, 20, and 17-year-old Tom. And my wife Lily now works a second career. She's a chaplain in one of our local schools. I also just want to, of course, pay tribute and acknowledge my parents, Helen and Marion Bloomfield. They're both passed on, but I dare say, especially at times like this, as you all know, you feel that those who have come before you and have helped shape you and your values and your life feel every day in the support they provided me and continue to. And I want to thank all of those who have been, I guess, as I had a blessing earlier on in the temple, and a number of people said to me that the community was praying for our leaders and for our response. And I want to thank those who have been praying, people of many faiths, who have been wishing us strength and insight and wisdom into our leaders as we face this very difficult challenge. Many of you are leaders in your communities, and leadership comes in many forms. Each of you play a vital role, and I know you will have contributed enormously to our collective response over this last 20 months. The best definition of leadership I've ever heard was one a couple of years ago from a disability advocate, Philip Patson. And it's a very simple definition. Leadership, he said, is an invitation to collective action. An invitation to collective action. And I can't think of a better definition. And if you think about New Zealand's response to this emergent pandemic last year, and when everybody was asked to do really quite a remarkable thing to go home and stay at home, an invitation was extended to act collectively. And New Zealand has accepted that invitation, and look what happened. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So this evening I would like to reflect on what I call lessons on life and leadership in COVID-19. And given the theme is around good governance, I will link it back to good governance, but I won't talk about governance per se. I hope that some of what I've got to say will provide some insights, perhaps from a fresh perspective on what good governance looks like. I think after that there are going to be some reflections from the Ambassador, and then there was question time. And just a reminder for those of you who haven't watched one of the stand-ups recently, when we get to question time, you don't need to politely put your hand up and wait for someone else. So you just shout your question at me. Dr. Bloomfield! Dr. Bloomfield! And don't worry if someone else is already shouting, just shout louder. And if someone's already asked your question, don't let that put you off. Just ask the same question. But I'm just letting you know, I will give the same answer. So it's quite hard to remember what it was like back at the start of 2020. I'm sure you feel the same way. I was saying to Phil Goff earlier on, and people often ask me, do I have any regrets or anything I would do differently? Well, the only thing I would do differently would be to keep a diary, because everything is such a blur and there was such huge events happening. But I don't look back and think we should have done this or we should have done that. But I very much remember the very first stand-up we did. It was just over a month before that first case that Chris mentioned, on the 28th of February, actually, on the 28th of February, actually the day before, 27th of February, I was off mountain biking in South Island with my friends, and we were about to do another 2-day trip, and then I got the call that we had our first positive test, so I had to jump on a small plane from Westport, make my way back to Wellington for that announcement. But a month before, on the 27th of January, at the behest of our very good communications manager, Peter Abernethy, who's a wonderful person, he said, you know, we've got so many media inquiries coming in about this. Actually, it wasn't even called COVID-19 then, it was just this emerging situation. He said, let's do a stand-up to tell everybody at the same time what we know and then ask questions. So I made my way into a small room in the Ministry of Health with my very good colleague, Dr. Caroline McElnay. You may remember her. She was the one whose fringe grew longer and longer as we went through lockdown. Everyone seemed to observe that. And I introduced myself and Caroline, and we then said, well, here's what we know, which didn't take very long back in those days, and it's hard to remember just how little we actually knew. And then we answered questions, and for most of the questions at that time, the answer was, we don't know. Sometimes we would say, we will get that information. But what started out as a way to just help us manage the media inquiries became a bit of a thing. And we realised it became a very important vehicle for getting information out, in a sense, unfiltered to the public, and also for making sure that everybody knew what was happening. And so we kept that stand-up routine, I guess, going, and then by the time we came in the third week of March to that lockdown situation, and then the daily 1 o'clock stand-up, which was the Prime Minister and myself, became quite a thing. Of course, the joke was that if you wanted to go and do your supermarket shopping to stock up on toilet paper, of course, the time to do it was 1 o'clock, because that's when everyone else was at home watching their TV to find out just what in the world was happening. And interestingly, I talked to many health professionals as well, and they've said that they would stop in the GP surgery or whatever they were doing in the theatre lunch room and look and watch that. And the thing about the 1 o'clock stand-up is everybody got the information at the same time. And at a time when we were sort of isolated in our bubbles from each other, it gave us a sense of the collective, where we could all know that at the same time we were hearing the information, but also what we needed to do to make sure we could do our best. So, just in terms of governance, I think there's nothing like a global public health threat, like a 100-year pandemic, to really highlight where there is or isn't good governance in a nation or in a jurisdiction. And it's no surprise to me that New Zealand has got a track record of very good governance. I spent a year in 2011 at the World Health Organization in Geneva, and it was a wonderful time there. I was actually working on non-communicable disease prevention and control. Not exactly the most helpful thing when you get a communicable disease pandemic, but fortunately our training covers the full gamut. But the important thing I realised is that fundamental to a good health system in a country is good governance. It's very hard in countries where first of all, you need the citizens to be safe, so there's no armed conflict. But secondly, good governance is about ensuring that when resources are allocated to a specific purpose for improving well-being, that those resources go to where they need to go. And it's no coincidence that the New Zealand Public Service, year after year, comes top or set top or in the top 2 for being the least corrupt public service around the globe. And so New Zealand is well served by its public service. So the government, not just the elected representatives, but the public service as well, is fundamental to maintaining and improving the well-being of citizens. And at no time is that more important than when there is a really significant global crisis. And it is in those times when governments either step up or they don't, because their first priority is, of course, the safety and well-being of people. That's why they're elected to be there. And fortunately in this country, our government, and by that I mean all the elected representatives and the wider public service, has stepped up to do its job. That hasn't been the case in every jurisdiction. So, key lessons for me from COVID, and I think some of these really do apply to good governance. First of all, the power of collective action if people understand the why. And Chris mentioned this earlier on. Actually, when the Prime Minister stood up, you will remember it, I'm sure, the 21st of March last year, it was a Monday, I remember it well, and she said, well, on Saturday, 2 days ago, I introduced you to the alert level framework, and I said we would be in alert level 2 for a couple of weeks. Well, we're 2 days later, and we are in alert level 3 now, and in 2 days' time, we are going into alert level 4, and that effectively means we need to go home and isolate our budders. And no one said, why? What's this about? They understood why, because we had deliberately kept everyone informed, being transparent and open in our communication. So by the time we got to that Monday, I think my sense was most New Zealanders heaved the collective sigh of relief. They knew why. They could see what was happening abroad, especially in the UK, where I'm sure you have family, friends, colleagues. And we had bought ourselves a couple of weeks. And they realised that we needed to do this now, not in 2 weeks' time. And so what then was the collective call to action? Well, it's a very simple one. I have to acknowledge how amazing the communications campaign has been behind our COVID response. It's been what I call our most important public health intervention. It was a very simple call to action, that active leadership: stay home, save lives, be kind. It's a very different message from stay home and look after yourselves. It was an invitation to look after each other. Most people knew they weren't staying home to save their life. They were staying home to save the lives of their elderly neighbours or parents, their disabled friends, our Māori and Pacifica communities, who we knew if the virus had got away would have been much, much worse off. So the invitation was extended: stay home, save lives, be kind. And I thought, right, I can do that. So they started to reach out. And some communities, and I'm sure yours was one of them, had already been doing this. Iwi Māori were the first to mobilise to protect their whakapapa, because all too front of mind for them was the Spanish flu pandemic 100 years ago, where their populations had been decimated in many hawhānui around the country. So they acted swiftly to set up checkpoints to protect their elderly, their kaumata and kuia, and it was an act to intervene, to protect their whakapapa. But communities reached out. community groups, church groups, neighbourhoods, to find out who needed what. And so it was our collective kindness that really made the difference. One of the things I'm having to get used to is walking down the street and people recognising me. It was not in the job description when I took the role. I must say I should have read the fine print a little better. Probably somewhere it said, and by the way, there will be a 1 in 100 year pandemic, so prepare yourself. But I walked down the street, people recognise me, and many thousands have approached me and have been very generous in their comments. It's usually to thank me, and they want me to thank the team. I'm the visible face of that, but they recognise that I'm one of a big team of people. But some of those people walking down the street are wearing t-shirts with my face on it. This is a new thing. And on one of those t-shirts, underneath my visage, it says, "The Curve Crusher." The Curve Crusher. But here's the thing, I didn't crush the curve. No one individual crushed the curve. We crushed the curve with our collective kindness. It shows what is possible if people understand why. You actually don't need to tell them what and how. They know. And we had some wonderful examples of this in my organisation. And a very good one to describe is the development of our national contact tracing solution. We've got 12 public health units around the country. Some of them, their contact tracing prior to COVID-19 was done on paper. Some had spreadsheets, 2 or 3 had databases. But two teams in our Ministry of Health saw there was a need for something national. They got together, they built a prototype in a week, and they've continued to iterate it ever since. We're on about 30th iteration. They knew what to do, they saw what was needed because they understood the why. And my great hope is that as New Zealanders we can reflect on our achievement of our collective understanding of the why and think, what if we wanted to act collectively on some of these other great challenges that we as a nation aspire to do better on? Child poverty, housing and homelessness, environmental sustainability, indeed our contribution to global leadership around climate change. As I say to my team sometimes when the chips are down, no one is coming. In fact, no one can come because we've shut the border. But it is up to us. And actually we've shown as a country we have everything we need if we act in each other's interests. Second lesson for me was, not surprising this one, but people actually value being safe and looked after first and foremost. And they care about their vulnerable communities. They are prepared to make quite great sacrifices for the collective. But when you are in that situation of a global pandemic, a huge public health threat, and governments intervene to look after the population, actually people see that and they see the work of the public service and they notice it perhaps more than they normally would, and they really value that. So when we were giving advice around what was the right thing to do in those first few months, there were 3 or 4 things that were top of mind. First of all, top of the list was ensuring the well-being and safety of New Zealanders, of course. The second thing was our responsibilities to our Pacific neighbours, because just the year before, in 2019, you will know, we had a measles outbreak here in Auckland, and the virus got from Auckland into Samoa, and the consequences were disastrous, and we were adamant that New Zealand was not going to be the route whereby COVID-19 got into the Pacific. The third thing, and this was very real, was protecting our healthcare system. Now, it doesn't matter, we had seen from the UK and other countries, it doesn't matter how good or how well resourced your healthcare system is. If you let the virus get away in the community, it will not cope, and it will have a great impact on your healthcare workforce, some of whom will get sick and die, and it will prevent many, many other people from accessing the care they need. And this was such a huge, huge anxiety for our healthcare workforce back in February last year. They could see, as one described to me, they could see a dark tunnel into which we were heading, and they didn't think we could avoid it. Yes, of course, they would have done their duty, they were incredibly professional and good. But it was of utmost importance to us then and to us now that we continue to protect our healthcare system and in particular our health workforce. The fourth consideration, of course, was the impact on the economy and our wider well-being. And I guess we didn't know what the impact of a lockdown would be. But as it's transpired, it became obvious quite quickly, and you would hear people around the globe say that the very best economic response to the virus is to the pandemic is to control the virus, and so it's transpired for New Zealand. People there have been safe and looked after first and foremost. Third, and just a short plug here because I've already given it one, that I thought this well before the pandemic, New Zealand does have a fantastic public service, and I think New Zealanders saw that and noticed it more than perhaps they normally would. And I'm not just talking about the health response. The development of the policy around wage subsidies and its rapid implementation by our colleagues in NSD, the work on caring for communities. We housed all our homeless people very quickly. Keeping the virus out of our prison system was a huge achievement, and it's one I'm very proud of. So there was an enormous amount of work that was done across the public service by people, again, mostly with a clear sense of purpose. They knew what to do and they got on and did it. The fourth lesson for me is I talk about the words that are very commonly used in the media at the moment. We have these words we use a lot in the public service. For those of you who live in the public service or work in the public service, we're often moving forward into the future space. As one of the sort of terms that's used. But there's this new set of words that the media use, and one that they really like is the new F word, failure. Everything that doesn't go 100% right is a failure. And I've been asked about this a number of times, and my response to this is actually the only failure is if we don't review and learn and adjust. And in a situation like this that is so rapidly evolving, you've got to be prepared to do that. And constantly review, and we've had a number of reviews done of all aspects of our response. There are, I think at last count, around 1,700 recommendations from all reviews. But it's that commitment to and that willingness to keep adapting and keep learning and keep evolving and improving that is really a hallmark of, I think, our success here. And there's a lesson for this in leadership and in governance, isn't there? You can't stand still. You have to constantly be curious. How can we do things better? As we say in the healthcare system, every day you go to work, you've got two jobs. First of all, to do the best you can, and secondly, to work out how to do it even better. It's the quality improvement cycle. The fifth lesson for me is, there's nothing like a global pandemic to sort of make you realise that there are some things you can't control. So when we talk about leadership, three domains of leadership: leading self, leading others, and leading context. Well, it's quite hard to lead the context when it's an unfolding global pandemic. So what it comes down to is, and often the hardest thing is to lead self. When you're in a situation where you can't control the context, you have to then focus on what is I can control, and something you can always control is your behaviours, how you respond. And of course our behaviours are a reflection of our values. We judge ourselves by our intentions, others judge us by our behaviours. And so when you're in that situation where, and this is a very important leadership lesson, when context is really out of your control, it's how you respond. And so I've been reflecting quite a lot and every day through last year, was getting up and thinking, what are the values that underpin my behaviours, how I want to front, how I want to come across. And it's sort of four values really. I've talked about kindness. Now I'll put my cards on the table here. I am a fully paid up member of the Kindness Club. Okay, I have been for a while. No, it's not a new thing, and we should not need a global pandemic or a pandemic to be kind to each other. Kindness, I think, is a meta value. And if you look at most of the world's great religions, it's a fundamental value. Kindness is about doing things for other people, actually. In Christianity, it's the second great commandment. The first one is love the Lord your God. The second is to love others as you would love yourself. It's kindness. The second part of that is important, and I will come back to that. So kindness, I think of as a meta value. I firmly believe that it was our commitment to and our response to the call to be kind to each other that actually saw us through those early, very challenging days, and will continue to see us through. Humility. Leading with humility. Now, leading with humility is characterised by being prepared to listen to people, to take advice, to be prepared to say, I got it wrong if you got it wrong, to be prepared to change your mind and explain why. Now I can tell you that when you're having a daily performance review at 1 o'clock on live television, that's not always a comfortable place to be owning up to that didn't go right and we're going to fix it. Or we've changed our mind, but you've been saying for months that masks are not useful. Why have you changed your mind? Because the evidence has emerged. So leading with humility, leaders who lead with humility will listen, take advice, be prepared to change their mind and explain why. And also when things don't go right, be prepared to put their hand up. And interestingly, many of those people who have come up to me on the street or have written to me, some lovely letters and emails, the thing that built trust, and this is fundamental to good governance, is trust. The thing that built trust was because we didn't pretend to have all the answers. It was because if we didn't know, we certainly don't know. Actually, people don't expect us to have all the answers. And when we say we don't know or we're not sure or get that information, actually I think, thank goodness for that. This is someone that we can trust. So leading with humility is fundamental to building trust. Compassion is a third value, and of course it's very important for us working in healthcare. It's often what drives us. But behind every statistic, behind every one of those cases, and the deaths, the 26 deaths, in the instance of those people who have been diagnosed or confirmed to have COVID-19, particularly when they are in intense public scrutiny in the case of an outbreak. They are worried, they are anxious, they may be very unwell. There is a whānau that is worried about them. And for each of those deaths, there is a family or whānau and a community that has lost someone. So always, even when we're in these national leadership roles, to lead with compassion. And finally, curiosity, of course. Always being interested, what are other countries doing? How could we do better? And in the early days of the pandemic, one of our most crucial sources of information, because there was no science, no one knew anything, was our diplomats in posts around the world. Now, for those of you who have had anything to do with New Zealand diplomats, they are fantastic, and they were just critical in getting information from really right around the globe to help us build a picture of what was happening in a rapidly evolving situation. And my sixth and final lesson, and this is an important one for good governance as well, I talked about kindness. You can't be kind to others unless you've been kind to yourself, actually. And being kind to yourself is making sure you are looking after yourself. And one of the big lessons for me last year was, and I've been in senior leadership roles for quite a while. I've been a chief executive for a few years before I took this role on 3 years ago. And I've been blessed with very good mental and physical health through my life. And I'm grateful for that. But I realised there came a point last year, and actually I can remember it was a very specific event where for the first time in a long time I didn't have stand-up. And it got to 10 o'clock in the morning and my cortisol levels just went through the roof because I started to prepare mentally and physically. And because I had no outlet for that, because I couldn't start doing the actual reading, assimilating knowledge and mentally start preparing for it, my body, I just became quite anxious. And I realised, goodness, time to have a holiday, take a break here. So it was a really big lesson for me that actually resilient people are not the ones that just keep going through thick and thin. They're the people who know their physical and mental limits, and they actively work to stay within them. They look after their mental and physical and spiritual and emotional well-being, their connection to those around them, because those are the things that help us maintain our energy, our physical and mental energy and our resilience. So I encourage you who are in leadership roles and governance roles to not only, of course, be thinking about those you're responsible for leading and looking after them, but making sure you're looking after your others, yourself as well. So just to finish, and then there'll be some reflections from the ambassador, I think, and then looking forward to question time, and I'm used to having any question thrown at me. Just to thank you again for this opportunity, and I'd just like to go back to that values-based leadership and how leaders want to come across and how those in governance roles want to come across. And one of the things that I learned very early as a leader was someone said to me when I was early in my leadership career, you know, people don't remember what you said or did. They will remember how you made them feel. And some of the most important feedback I've had is from children. And I've had a lot of letters from children. I think that there were English teachers or primary school teachers around the country who were getting their class to practice their letter writing skills to write to Dr. Bloomfield. But one of the wonderful pieces of feedback I've had, and children of course just say it like it is, and I'll characterise, it would be something like, "Dear Dr. Bloomfield, thank you to you and your team for your work. Thank you for telling us every day how many cases there were and how many people died. I liked it that you were calm. I liked it that you were calm. So if you think we were anxious, and I was very anxious, I had the first few weeks of this pandemic, I was waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning in a cold sweat thinking, oh my goodness, I don't know if I'm going to get the right advice here. But imagine how children felt. This was such a huge thing. And yes, they remembered that I told the numbers, but mostly they remembered that I was calm and chose to be calm, even when the questions might have been sort of, getting under my skin a bit. So a final point there is just remembering that actually people don't remember what you said or did, but they will remember how you make them feel. What's coming next? Well, I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions about it, and I don't have a crystal ball, but we do need to remain, our greatest strategic asset as a country has been our agility over this last 20 months. This pandemic has thrown a lot of curveballs at us, it will continue to do so. And so we must continue to learn to adapt, to act decisively, but most importantly, we will continue to do well as a nation if we keep acting together in each other's interests. Kia ora, thank you.